Good morning and welcome. We'll just leave it a couple of minutes for people to connect and join. Cool. All right, then. Good morning. It's 11:02. Hopefully there'll be a few more people joining, but we've got a packed agenda, so I think we should get this show on the road. So good morning and welcome, and thank you for joining IAB Europe's virtual connected TV event. My name is Ryan Martin, and I am a program manager for the global business marketing team at TikTok, and I'm also the chair of the IAB's European Brand Safety Advertising Committee. And it's my pleasure to be moderating the event and guiding you through the packed out agenda we have today. So very much looking forward to it. As many of you know, the IAB is a European level association for digital marketing and advertising. And through its members of national IABs, media, technology, and marketing companies, its mission is to lead a political representation and promote industry collaboration across Europe. And one of the ways we do this is by bringing people together through events like this that we have today, a meeting of the minds, if you will, to share our thoughts on connected TV. I want to highlight to you that the IAB Europe and myself are very grateful to our sponsors for this event, OneTrust and Magnite, who have helped to make this event possible. So thank you very much to them. Today, we've got a stellar lineup of speakers, moderators, and panelists in our sessions. And we'll shortly hear from our chief economist, Daniel Knapp, as he presents an overview of the connected TV landscape in Europe. We'll also then hear from multiple panelists and panels who will discuss the latest connected TV developments across Europe, the challenges and opportunities for measuring connected TV, brand safety and suitability for connected TV. And finally, we'll have a keynote presentation from OneTrust on how to collect consent and preferences in CTV applications. So as you can see, we're really going the full gamut of all you need to know on connected TV. So I'm sure there'll be something in there for everyone. I think it's going to be a fascinating couple of hours, and we're grateful for all of our experts for taking the time out of their busy schedules to share their knowledge and expertise with us today. I want to highlight to you that every speaker we have today is a member of IAB Europe. So if you'd like more information on how you can get involved with the activities of the IAB Europe and potentially at speak events like this yourself in the future, please do get in contact with Helen and Lauren, who have been helping pull this event together, and they'll be able to signpost you for how you can get more involved with the work that the IAB Europe are doing. Before we kick off, we just want to establish a quick stakeholder map, a stakeholder breakdown of the audience with a quick poll. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could complete the poll you see on the screen now, I'll share the results you see shortly. You can actively, as well as getting involved in this poll, you can actively participate in today's event, as each panel will be followed by an audience Q&A. So if you have questions for today's panelists, please submit them in the Zoom window, and we'll be sharing them with the panelists for them to answer. In addition to the poll, there'll be a few audience polls on the way, so on specific topics. So we're looking forward to your participation in these polls as we make our way through. So thank you very much for completing the poll. I think the results should be coming through, and here they are. So we've got 48% of our partners and ad tech today. So great representation from there. Some publishers on the call as well, with almost 15%. So yeah, a nice mixture, and we've got some agency folk as well. So welcome to you all, and yeah, looking forward to sharing and talking you through this packed out agenda, as I say. So thank you very much for getting involved in that poll. Some really interesting results there. It's always good to know who we're speaking to and who's been able to join us for these kind of sessions. So thank you again. Now, without further ado, I think it's time to introduce our first panelist, our first speaker, sorry, and it's obviously the Chief Economist, Daniel Knapp, who will talk us through the connected TV landscape in Europe. So Daniel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and a warm welcome from me as well. I'm going to share with you some introductory remarks on the CTV landscape as it emerges in Europe. Those who follow my presentations know that I like to show lots of statistics, not necessarily on audience consumption, but on the revenue and the spend side of things. And despite CTV being a narrative around the globe, firmly established in the SEC filings of key ad tech firms and so forth, we actually have a fairly limited data landscape in Europe, not least because the CTV environment is, number one, very fragmented, and there is a plethora of definitions what CTV is. Is it addressable TV, smart TV, or is it something else? And the panel will dive further into that. However, I'll provide some statistics that hopefully contextualize what the landscape that we're in looks like to provide kind of further fuel for the panel. I think it's important to note that we are just coming out of a severe reset of the digital advertising market or the ad market overall. In 2020, those who've seen our AdX Benchmark 2020 results, we saw a better than expected performance of digital advertising of 6.3% in 2020. After a slower start into the first quarter of 2021, we're actually witnessing a continued acceleration of ad spend, not just in digital, but across the board. Notably also important for our session here in linear CTV. Massive price inflation, which we expect is going to continue actually for the next 2 or 3 years, which means that linear television also is going to perform better than initially expected. But let's focus back on digital advertising. We are expecting now that digital advertising in Europe is going to grow by 28.6% in 2021, which is going to be the fastest growth since 2008. So a massive acceleration. And indeed, it is, apart from classifieds, all formats which are going to enjoy this growth. If we look at 2020, the blue bars here, we can see a fairly disparate landscape of growth in 2020, which was owed to the fact that you had more performance-based switch on, switch off media. Brand advertising was lowered during the first half of the year before it came back. However, in 2021, we see key formats from social, video to audio growing 40% and more. And even search, which some had already written off in 2020, is going to grow by around 30%. Video here includes in-stream video, outstream video, and in-feed video. And it also includes CTV. That could be smart TV, or it could be addressable TV. However, the national IRBs that are contributing data define it. So do take this data with a little grain of salt, as it's not complete yet. However, we're working on establishing a spend measurement framework for CTV, which also ensures that we have comparable apples to apples definitions in Europe. I showed this slide during our last session on CTV in April. However, you will see some new logos on this slide. And we somehow have the fortunate circumstance that whenever our virtual CTV day launches, on the day before or on the very day, an acquisition or some other major news is taking place. And just this morning, when I checked my Twitter feed, there was an announcement of RTL and Amobi joining forces in continental Europe in a tech alliance to really consolidate and bundle from sales and a tech perspective their addressable TV solutions. Meaning that we're seeing increased, I think this is a bellwether, that we're seeing not just on the national level, but also on the international level now in Europe, increased collaboration, which adds fuel to the development of CTV, which in comparison to the US has been lagging behind in most European countries. The shift to streaming services persists. We saw in 2020 globally a tipping point where OTT subscriptions outstripped pay TV. However, again, this is something that is skewed by the US. If we look at the European markets, we're actually seeing pay TV penetration continuing to grow. However, pay TV bundles tend to include OTT offerings as well. In the landscape of first-party data, the deprecation of third-party cookies, we're going to see a massive reallocation of marketing budgets, which will also benefit CTV. And with the benefit of CTV, there are also some adjacent sectors which are going to enjoy the growth. On this chart here, we can see the communications bucket, which includes paid media, but also PR, which is steady or static over time, but there's a reallocation towards digital, then all the other bits, experience, communication, commerce, and technology is going to grow to as much as the paid media bit. However, these things are not separate directly from paid media, but they also fuel further growth and investment, in particular on the digital side of paid media. So a massive reallocation here of budgets towards retail media, new walled gardens that we're seeing, but also to the traditional walled gardens. However, also new addressable media like CTV and also tier one premium publishers that also includes broadcasters, in particular at the interaction point with CTV. So macro changes in the digital landscape are fueling further development in CTV. Smart TV adoptions across European countries, and here are the big five in Europe, is going to continue. We are seeing by 2024, on average, around 0.5 smart TV devices per household that even exclude set-top boxes and so forth. So there's really the TVs. The UK here stands out, but also Germany catching up very quickly with 0.78 or 0.85 devices per household. So device penetration is strong. And we're also seeing that regulatory initiatives in key European markets, such as the digital switchover in Italy, or a less strict regulation on CTV advertising in France, allows advertisers to take advantage of this device landscape. But what about the CTV ad market size? That's a huge question, as it depends on the definition. Let me direct you to the right side of this slide first. We're seeing a global market in 2021 of around 18 billion euros of CTV ad spend, which is going to grow to 37 billion in 2025. The European proportion of that, according to our estimates, is fairly small. We expect the market to be around 1.3 billion. That includes various different types of connected TV advertising. It includes what broadcasters do, what hardware manufacturers do. It includes YouTube and so forth, all watched on the smart TV. If we try to break out this 1.3 billion across the markets that we cover in our ADEX study, which is 27 markets in Europe, not just the European Union, but also the UK, Russia, and so forth, we can see that the vast majority of the spend is currently allocated to the UK, where nearly 70% of all CTV ad spend is, followed by Germany and France, Italy, Netherlands, and Spain. But it means that there is a huge disparity already in the maturity of these markets, and there's significant headroom for markets to grow. However, as I said, it depends on the definition, because in some markets, like Germany, like Spain in particular, with very strong reliance on HbbTV and broader addressable solutions, which kind of muddies the water. And it really depends on the national market and depends on your perspective on the CTV market, whether those figures should be included in the definition of CTV. Let me go to programmatic advertising, which is increasingly becoming a pervasive enablement infrastructure for digital advertising. Overall, programmatic advertising in 2020 grew by 8.3% to 8 billion euros. And that excludes the broader concept of automation, i.e. closed walled garden, self-serve platforms on social media. So we are in an 8 billion market right now, into which CTV is very slowly moving, and we're expecting it to fuel that market in the future. So over half of display spend, banner, video, and so forth, is now programmatic. So Europe is a programmatic first market. Remarkably, whereas programmatic initially was really random inventory and display, we're seeing video overall, that includes all video, as a key growth driver of programmatic, where 5.2 billion of these 8 billion are now being allocated to video spend. Again, illustrating that brand quality environments are actually being served by programmatic infrastructures. If we look at our attitudes to programmatic survey, which we recently launched, where we surveyed 300 different market participants across Europe, from media buyers, from advertisers, ad tech firms, and publishers, we can see that when we ask for what is the key programmatic growth area in your mind, that connected television ranks the highest among all of the constituents here. higher than audio, higher than digital out of home, and higher also than separately here the OTT segment. However, it's quite notable that advertisers, agencies, and publishers have a fairly consensual view on CTV in terms of its importance, but ad tech vendors really skew the picture here, with nearly 80% seeing this as the highest ranked one, which I think is a very interesting development, in particular when we look at the kind of disparity between the initiatives that ad tech companies are deploying, what's happening in the US, what's really happening kind of on the ground, for instance, on the broadcaster level, but also on the kind of agency level in Europe. So it would be interesting also to discuss in our panel why these different views persist and how they can be aligned further. Overall, the programmatic landscape is consolidating. And this will be further accelerated by the deployment of programmatic on CTV. We are already seeing that buyers are reducing the number of DSPs they're using concurrently. This has been a downward trend over time. And more we are moving towards one-to-one relations, away from this kind of open market of, in a sense, global trade, and more towards individual trade agreements, if you will. Overall, we can see that with the end of third-party cookies, with the rise of walled gardens, we're seeing a fragmentation of the overall internet into several different internets: the Google, the Apple, the Facebook, the Amazon internet, challenger gardens, and so forth. And CTV emerges here as a new walled, or at least hedged gardens, because very different players are more open, less open. They're very, very different approaches between, for instance, Planet V on ITV and what other players, in particular, for instance, hardware manufacturers, are offering. So we're going to see not just one CTV walled garden as a part of this many internets, but potentially further fragmentation. This is going to be a key challenge. How can CTV really replicate one of the core assets that television has, which is its broad quality reach? So fragmentation, not just on a national level between countries, but also within countries and within different types of inventory. However, with the alliances we're currently seeing, there's also potentially a move to what I would call a Europe Inc., i.e. a closer collaboration between market participants to remove these barriers and to recreate that scale and to kind of fortify the position in particular of endemic players in the market. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention of this whistle-stop tour, and I'm going to pass back to Ryan to introduce our panel. You're on mute, Ryan.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much for taking us through that, Daniel. An amazing look into the connected TV landscape there. It continues to be such an evolving market with new players constantly appearing, emerging, as Daniel said, and there's lots of development in the channel, and it's given us a lot to think about there. So thank you very much, Daniel. So to hopefully aid that digestion, we're now going to hear from our first panel of the day that will discuss the latest developments helping to shape the connected TV landscape. They'll be looking at partnerships, players, and performance in connected TV advertising. And don't forget, we want your involvement in this too, so you can submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens, and we'll review these questions and put a selection of them to the panel at the end of the session. So back over to you, Daniel, for your panel.
Thank you very much, Ryan. A warm welcome to this fantastic panel. I'm particularly pleased that we have perspective of ad tech agencies and also streaming services, etc. So we got Ed Whale from Magnite. We got Patrick Morrow from the Trade Desk, Vicky Fox from OMD, and last but not least, Bart Sjersweda from Rakuten. So thank you very much for joining. And as a kind of opening question, I'm keen to see what trends that I showed in my presentation did resonate with you particularly, and which other things do you think would be relevant to understand the emerging CTV landscape in Europe? Vicky, would you like to start with a UK perspective?
I certainly can. It was really interesting to see how far potentially the UK is ahead of this, and I think that gives us interesting perspective and sets us up with some challenges, because we need to make sure we get, our measurement and our definitions and our processes and our structure, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about in a minute. But gives a big responsibility for us to start leading the way in this. So I'm very excited about that.
And Ed, I know you have looked at a European perspective for a long time, so you have a good understanding of the of the different markets. When you look at what I showed in terms of statistics and what you just heard Vicky say, how do you assess the state of development in Europe more broadly?
Hey Daniel, thanks so much for all of the content you just shared there. I mean, I think from my perspective, it's just there's so much going on in this space, whether it be the bounce back from the pandemic, the general programmatic adoption. For me, I thought the explosion of the streaming services, love that slide. I'll be taking that. That was, you know, the thing that most kind of hit me. I think, you know, the pandemic's obviously accelerated new media consumption habits, but also, you know, buying patterns as well. So it'll be interesting to see how I think advertisers are likely to lean in as we're coming out of the pandemic to kind of capture, you know, new customers that might be changing their behaviors, or even, you know, retain customers that they may see. And I think you touched on the definition point. I don't want us to go down that rabbit hole. We could be here all day on that point. But I think, you know, the CTV definitions aren't perfect at the moment precisely because of that pace of change. With regards to Europe, yeah, UK certainly ahead. That's how we're seeing it. But many strategies, I think, to kind of combat new entrants are being replicated across the markets. If of course, you know, on the other side, you know, viewing patterns might be disparate market by market.
Yeah. And Bart, you have a particular expertise on the Benelux and the Nordics. Benelux, in particular, the Netherlands, always a first mover market. The Nordics with a very, very high pay TV penetration, and very mature markets in that regard. I focused, of course, on the European Big Five in my presentation. What trends do you see in the Nordics and the Benelux if you relate it to the stats that I showed?
Well, to be honest, I think it's always you're not the only one to look at EU5 only, and for me that typically is a benefit internally because I get some more freedom to explore some new ideas and thoughts around how we go to market in most of my markets. And even though you'd think that the Benelux and Nordics are very similar in terms of programmatic adoption and CTV strategies, etc., I think the Netherlands is well advanced in that. And I think in some of the markets in the Nordics, they're really catching up. Although I do see that the differences per market are really big. I think a market like Sweden is very much dominated by BVOD players who haven't really seen a lot of CTV in general, whereas in the Netherlands it's becoming more common, and in the UK obviously it's already been there for quite some time. So in terms of also viewing numbers, they really start picking up, and we've seen tremendous growth over the last year, I would say. So I think in terms of the numbers that you showed, I think we're really seeing an uptick in demand from all sides. So I think it's more around defining a CTV strategy in most markets, and especially some agencies are trying to now define what that should look like, especially in some of the markets in the Nordics. But overall, I think the Benelux and Nordics are really catching up in the CTV space.
And Patrick, of course, CTV is a cornerstone of the Trade Desk strategy, and I always enjoy pouring through your SEC filings to count the number of mentions of CTV. When you relate the CTV story, which seems to be focused on the US, and compare what's happening in Europe from a demand perspective, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's been a very interesting journey. If we look back 2020, as you say, most of the focus was on the US. A lot of the narrative and a lot of the stories were, look how successful CTV has been. Here are some statistics from the US. And I think within Europe, and particularly the UK, I think 2020 was an education year. It was all about telling people what connected TV is, allowing people to understand who the players were, and also educate why they can't do exactly what was going on in the US. So we had that year of letting them know who the players are, the new people such as Bart in terms of the Rakutens or the Pluto, Samsung TV Plus. There are new operators out there. 2021 feels like the execution year, where teams like Vicky's team and others in the market have started to understand the market and who is out there and the opportunities out there, and have started really adopting that and moving their budgets into that space. And what we're seeing, particularly this year, our own figures are showing 10 times growth in CTV just in Europe. So there really is a trend, an upward trend in that market. And we're going to see more of that as more players come into the market and better measurement tools and coming in as well.
And Patrick, when you say 10x growth, is that in terms of consumption, inventory, or is it in terms of revenue? That's
in terms of revenue. In terms of the consumption, that naturally has just been on an upward trajectory since 2019, when everything was starting to come into this, more AVOD providers coming in there. In 2020, we were talking about the consumption levels going through the roof, but that trend wasn't necessarily there. The investment wasn't following the eyeballs. Now what we're seeing is that catch up in services, people finding that adoption, realizing that those unique users are there, and they can complete that curve, as we like to talk about in TV. The ultimate goal is to increase your reach, your 1+ cover, and that's where we see people are using and finding the value in connected TV market.
Let me stay with you for a second, because I'm very keen to understand what changes have there been in how CTV is being bought. We know that programmatic is a part of CTV, but it's we come in particular in Europe from a very kind of supply constrained market. So from your demand perspective, how are advertisers changing how they're buying CTV, and what particular trends are you seeing?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting areas around this was actually in your slides, in terms of looking at the different opportunities or the different DSPs, or the number of DSPs that people are using. That's getting consolidated. People don't want to learn different platforms. They don't want to go through different platforms and direct to media owners. They want to consolidate it. They want to make it easier. And that's what we're finding with connected TV. Early on in sort of 2020, there still was, and still is, a huge reliance on BVOD providers. The broadcasters, particularly in the UK, have a huge monopoly, both on the inventory, but also the revenue. So there was a huge reliance on that. And I think it was about opening up the opportunities and opening up the doors and showing that there are other providers out there. And what we've noticed is this shift in understanding, but also adoption to the OTT first publishers, as we would call them within the trade desk. And that movement has led to the revenue growth that I'm talking about, but also a natural evolution of programmatic products that are out there. BVOD providers have been using connected TV as a tool for many, many years. It's been there, but it's flipped in terms of going from 25% of inventory being on connected TV to now 75 to 85% of the likes of Channel 4 or Sky or ITV. So naturally, their investment in that area is going to be much larger from the technology perspective. And we're seeing that with the partnerships that we've recently done with Channel 4, offering PMPs. And these tools are really leaning in and interesting our digital first agencies as well. So the non-native TV buyers who are coming to the market and starting to realize the power that is in connected TV.
I need to come to Vicky for a second. Vicky and we had a great conversation actually last week about CTV. And Vicky, you shared some fascinating insights on how you as an agency kind of have been rethinking on how you work with CTV. Do you want to share with the audience on how your approach to CTV has changed in the way that you buy it and in the way that you manage it?
Absolutely, and that's the important thing, because we cannot let agency structure and legacy structures get in the way of connected thinking, pardon the pun. But I think historically, and I think it goes back to what Patrick's just said, because the broadcasters have been so dominant in the UK in CTV, a lot of the activations come through the AV, traditional TV investment teams. But over the last couple of years, we've seen video briefs coming through the digital teams and moving into CTV from two ways. So we had to, we've restructured OMD this year to think about that and take advantage of that. And we have a connected performance team that we've joined together, so that we have no silos. We've really accepted that the best way to respond to the briefs is to have one brief, one budget, and one plan, so that we don't get lost in agency structures, because so much of the data sets are now connected. So many of our partners, people like the trade desk, are able to offer lots of different solutions through as we said, this consolidation of the DSPs, and we have to reflect that in our structure, and that's exactly what we're doing future facing, definitely.
And Bart, from a kind of sell-side perspective, consolidation of DSPs, not letting agency legacy structures get in the way. When you look at your buyers, do you see these trends in practice?
Most definitely. I think what we've tried to do from the beginning is really make sure that we make our inventory as accessible as possible through any different means. So, we work together with Magnite, we work together with the trade desk and with a lot of other partners in the ecosystem to make sure that anyone can really access us from any point. But obviously, I do see that there are still some debates within agencies and within buyers who's best placed to run these campaigns and who's best placed to plan these campaigns. And I think, and in some cases that's the broadcast teams and the AV teams, and in other cases the programmatic teams, and in some cases nowadays you see that it's becoming a mix, right? And that's, I think, to Vicky's point. What we're also seeing is that now AV teams are getting involved, but the actual execution sits with programmatic teams, and more and more you see that adoption of programmatic take a bigger impact, although it really does depend on the market. So in Southern Europe, that's a bit less typically, but in markets like the UK or in the Benelux and Nordics, definitely most of it is now being done programmatically.
Yeah, and we're going to come to this responsibility struggle in a second. And I think what really holds true with all that fragmentation, with new inventory, new players coming in, it has never been as simple as today. It's only going to get more complicated. But I need to disappoint you that we're not going to speak about the Nordics and the Benelux now, but because I want to go to Ed. At Magnite, you're launching a new piece of research on CTV focusing on the European Big Five. Can you reveal a little bit of what that's going to be about?
A sneak peek, yes, yeah, happy to. So yeah, this is the third research report actually that's come out of the Magnite team in the last 18 months. So quite interesting to run some comparisons, kind of pre, during, post. I wish we could say post-pandemic. Perhaps we're not quite out of it yet, but really our goal is to try to better understand, the CTV audiences. What are they comprised of? What are their behaviors, their habits? How does that how are they differentiated also from a traditional linear TV only viewing audience? And we surveyed 5,000 respondents, 1,000 in each market, and we looked at a number of different attributes and aspects. And the report also contains contributions from partners like Samsung and Trade Desk. So it's definitely well worth a read when it launches next week. Just to pull out a couple of the top line stats, what we found was actually the CTV audience best mirrors the national demographic profile, while linear TV only viewing is beginning to really concentrate in older demographics. We also had an interesting stat, contributed by Samsung. So since January 2020 to May 2021, traditional TV viewing rose by 17%. I think all consumption has generally risen. CTV consumption rose by 55%. So a much faster acceleration. And within that CTV acceleration, also AVOD is starting to take a more prominent position, where previously I think SVOD was fairly dominant. It seems like we're reaching a level now where people are kind of ready to sort of supplement an already pretty saturated SVOD selection with AVOD services. So that's a huge opportunity, obviously, for advertisers. And then, just thinking about what Vicky was saying as well around kind of connected teams, was it connected planning across linear and CTV? Hugely important. We found that 71% of European audiences are now hybrid TV viewers, i.e. they watch some combination of linear and CTV. So I don't think it could be, it's as important as ever to think about, what the right balance is, depending on your objectives and target audience, and obviously on that side of linear and CTV activations. But it feels as though CTV needs to be considered in most television activations, today. So you'll be hearing us talk about that research, I'm sure, a lot in the next few weeks. But those are some of the key insights. And
you mentioned, linear TV, CTV activations, and previously, both Bart and Vicky have spoken about the, responsibility struggle within agencies. And I think these two things, what you mentioned and what Bart and Vicky mentioned, really bring home a very important point, which is the metrics. So let's look at the buying metrics. Do you all think that CTV will be bought on GRPs or on impressions? Is it going to be a digital way of thinking, or is it going to be a TV way of thinking, or something entirely different depending on the market? Who wants to start? Patrick, maybe.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So I think there's value in both, but I think we have to sort of have a look back in terms of and the different markets to start with. GRP, obviously with TV works in terms of the UK market, you have Barb. Everyone buys into that, is the gold standard in terms of you have all of the broadcasters buying in. So you have a uniformed and a unity behind that metric. So you're able to use that currency and sell off that and optimize off that. And it works very well for agencies and clients who are buying into that. With connected TV right now, as with the rest of the digital market, you don't have a gold standard unified currency that we all use or measure against or use for reporting. So it's very difficult to establish any sort of form of using GRP without that. It's sort of jumping ahead too far. I think the first instance, what needs to happen is unified measurement. And tools like Unified ID 2.0, which is what the Trade Desk is a big champion of and done some work with, getting behind these sorts of new technologies that can replace third-party cookie, can be used for different beneficial purposes, particularly within connected TV, because TV companies at the moment, specifically in BVOD, those established broadcasters, haven't been able to provide anything to their clients in terms of measurement tools. Project Dovetail was something that Barb has been working on for many, many years, still not got there. You have C-Flight now, which is coming out, but there's still that fragmentation between the different providers. A independent sort of measurement tool is what's needed here. And then the discussion can begin in terms of looking back on how you measure that. Do you still work on impressions and GRPs? But from a personal opinion, looking at the differences, I think impressions still provide more precise and more insight, more transparency for the measurement purposes that we operate in CTV. And it plays a different role than linear. It plays a different part in that marketing funnel. So I think for me, it would be impressions, but we've got some time before we get to that debate, I think.
And Vicky, from an agency perspective, I think, again, integrated teams, no silos. Do you agree with that point of view?
I think you're right, Patrick. I don't think ratings are going anywhere from the TV landscape anytime soon, and I guess it's up to us as planners to figure out kind of how we bring that together. I kind of like to think it's best to broadcast, and then how you use your addressable data-led channels as well. So you have to bring those two together. But my strong caution, is that impressions aren't views, and we absolutely need to. If we're going to talk about impressions, then we have to then talk about additional view-through rates. So you have another level of detail that comes in. You cannot compare ratings and impressions. You have to bring together what is a view, and then you can start to align some of these channels. And while, as you said, while we wait for the next stage of total measurement, which we're hoping, there are some solutions around the corner that we're all very interested in watching, seeing what happens there. We have to kind of do that heavy lifting ourselves at the agency level to bring plans together.
Right. And just a quick note to the audience, please do feel free to ask questions, type them in the question box. We'll have around 5 minutes at the end to address a few of those. So please fire away if there's anything we'd like to ask the panelists. From measurement to the programmatic infrastructure, I've showed in my presentation that programmatic continues to grow and is kind of moving up the funnel into new formats, including CTV. And separately at IB Europe, we just launched a guide to programmatic CTV advertising. Bart, Ed, I know you've been involved there. What kind of buying metrics, what kind of KPIs are we currently seeing in programmatic CTV?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, particularly on the programmatic activations, yes, we are from pure buying metric standpoint, it's a CPM activation. Obviously, as Vicky just stated, if we're trying to pitch this in the context of broader based TV, then completed views is obviously a key metric. That's not today a buying metric in programmatic, but considering that we're talking about professionally produced long form content with ad pods, we see view through rates at 95% plus. So when we track back to an effective cost per completed view, which is a stat we typically provide to buyers, those levels are pretty competitive. It is entirely, it is, I'd say, 95% deal driven today, be it direct sold or a programmatic type execution, programmatic guaranteed, non-guaranteed PMPs. We haven't yet seen an adoption in open market buying strategies. I think that's meaningful yet in Europe.
Which would be suspicious in a supply constrained market.
What's that?
Which would be slightly suspicious in a supply constrained market.
Absolutely, yeah. And equally from a kind of data activation standpoint, we're not talking about browser-based environments anymore. There is not a wealth of third-party data sets that can be applied to this inventory. In fact, but however, conversely, there is a lot of unique first-party data sets that sit on the media owner or the device manufacturer side that can be activated. So we're seeing kind of deterministic, light linear viewer segments, heavy streamers, contextual first-party data also being applied. So those are some of the key, the key trends I think that we're seeing, in how this is being traded programmatically. And post-campaign, we strive to provide a unique device measurement. That's a one-to-one kind of audience size measurement, incremental reach to linear activations, brand uplift studies. These are all stuff that we look to append to these programmatic activations.
And Bart, from your side, what kind of data are you making available? How are you enabling programmatic buyers?
In general, I think it's a very immature space still, even from our point of view. In terms of the buying metrics, like I think most of them touched upon, it's in my opinion almost always going to be CPM. But you do have buyers that are looking at how can we translate that into GRPs, for instance, although they still agree that buying CPM is probably the way to go. And then you can start looking into, well, is it possible to start transacting on a cost per completed view model, as Ed pointed to? And I think there's with the current metrics that we are seeing on our side, I think on average between 95 and 98% completion rates on CTV make it very clear that you can actually almost start transacting on views instead of impressions, because the risks seem to be very low. Similar for viewability, and I think once you start covering all of those elements in a much better way, then I think a while ago Google started with this viewable CPM model, and I think that might be something that you can eventually moving forward introduce into CTV as well. So yeah, I think more and more it's going to be about the actual impact of CTV, which, if you come to the data point, we will be able to provide much more data moving forward. I think the contribution into the CTV guy was also very much around contextual from my point of view. And I think contextual is going to make a big comeback in this space. And I think it will also really help buyers make sense of what it is that they're buying, instead of all of these, third-party data metrics that they've previously been looking at for video. buying on interests or otherwise, because it's a household device and you'll have multiple people in the room. So it's always going to be hard to target that individual. And instead, you should be looking at how can we make this message relevant to the context in which it's being viewed, or the time it's being watched, or whatever it might be. So I think that's going to be, the transition of CTV in the coming years.
Before we move to questions, just very quickly, 30 seconds each, real talk. We're in a very nascent market still. What needs to happen in the next 6 to 12 months to really accelerate CTV growth in Europe? What's the key priority? Vicky, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, I think we need to be really clear on the role for channel. I think we need to, as planners, make sure that there's 4 things that needs to be in place: the content, the platform, the data, and the audience measurement, to make sure that we build out our tapestry of sort of total television solutions.
Ed.
I think, number one prioritization is the measurement challenge, kind of trying to tackle that, stand up and be measured. That's been a huge source of growth, of investment for us, certainly, is to offer, measurement that, deterministically shows incremental reach that's driven. Outside of that, I think we're likely to see more collaboration between broadcasters. There's so much movement going on in that space. I think we're going to see more inventory being enabled for programmatic as well. So not just what we can't say traditional CTV, but addressable TV, set-top box inventory, HbbTV, coming to programmatic. I think this is a trend that we're likely to see as well coming up.
Patrick, from your perspective.
Yeah, I completely agree with Ed in terms of, I think, the uniformity or the unity amongst broadcasters, but also the OTT first publishers sort of coming together, realizing that this is a unified landscape in terms of connected TV, certainly coming together. And the second thing, I think, to sort of also partly answer Simon Thomas's question, which is measurement, also to echo Vicky's point and Ed's point, is something that is a unified identifier in terms of bringing together and helping that activation, so we're not reliant just in terms of impressions or GRPs. Unified ID measurement can also provide intuition and information around what happens after the person has seen that advert without any PII getting misleading. So it's all around privacy safe but intuitive advertising.
Bart, some quick final comment.
I mean, they said some very sensible things on the measurement piece, and I think that totally makes sense. The measurement challenge will be around, I'd call it uniformity in setting a measurement solution that brings parity to the market and brings all the manufacturers and broadcasters together through unified measurement solutions. And what that means is that collaboration needs to happen between TV manufacturers, streaming providers like ourselves, and broadcasters. And if and when that happens, I think that's when you can start seeing developments in this space. The TV manufacturers have this possibility. Other partners in the ecosystem need to start working together with them as well in order to get that moving.
Brilliant, fantastic. And I see lots of great questions pouring in. Just very quickly, I think we can only answer a few. First one was started at my presentation at a big logo soup, which isn't a Volumascape, just a logo soup. Will that persist, or will we see, after mergers and acquisitions, much fewer logos? I think we're going to see both. We're going to see the logos change, so we see consolidation on the one hand, but also fragmentation on the other. I believe the markets will be predominantly evolve on a national basis still. International collaboration, apart from some examples, I believe in the next 2 years will remain limited as national markets with their own trading cultures need to adopt. But more M&A, yes. At the same time, I think we're going to see more fragmentation in the service layer. So not the streaming services, but kind of in particular those who are able to orchestrate, specialist vendors who can map and measure across walled gardens. That's going to become essential. I think we already answered partly the next questions about why we're still talking about GRPs and impressions. Quickly to the panel, what are the main challenges faced by publishers on making their CTV inventory available programmatically? I think there might be a bit of trauma going back in 2009, what happened there. Anyone wants to comment on that?
think, well, I think Bart probably is the best person to lead it off as the publisher of the broadcast on the chat.
I think it's definitely been challenging the last year or so to get more activations through programmatic because of the different DSPs that you're working with, and everyone having their own levels of brand safety, privacy settings, etc., that sometimes make it difficult to transact through those DSPs, and you don't really know what's causing it not to transact. But typically it's things around consent strings, full consent strings, GDPR strings that are either being passed through, or it's binary consent or otherwise. And similarly, some of the content can't be accurately mapped to a specific ID, and then it gets filtered out. So I think those have been some main challenges, but I think mostly we've solved them with the bigger DSPs, and some smaller DSPs. We're still figuring some of these issues out, but in most cases, I think we're nearly there in terms of bringing all of our supply, or almost all of our supply, to programmatic.
Last question, particularly to Patrick and Ed, about contextual. What are the current solutions available for contextual? Kind of, what is the roadmap of making it available via programmatic, and what's the role of first and third-party data in this process? Anyone of you wants to pick that?
I actually think that content metadata is a short-term focus, that we should be looking to create consistency across how CTV providers are categorizing their content. You know, you've got Nielsen codes, you've got IAB taxonomies, you've got custom taxonomies across the broadcasters, but on the other side, we know that there's appetite to get genre-based targeting, program, show, and so on and so forth. So that is actually a key focus, because right now it's disparate across providers, and that's likely hindering further investment. So yeah, so that's a good question.
I think that's all that we have time for today. Oh, sorry, did you want to?
I was literally just going to add, in terms of, it ties nicely into the ask question that you had around the challenges facing the broadcasters and around this, which is first party data. You have to protect your viewers. Ultimately, from a broadcaster perspective, they're number one. So protecting their interests, and that can be one of the challenges. You want to inform those advertising solutions. You want to provide better data for the advertisers, but you also got to remember the viewing experience. And that's where, you know, a lot of the broadcasters and the publishers who have been successful in this route in terms of evolving their products and moving it into and providing better targeting and more data, they've taken that into consideration first, you know, on preventing things like CMPs. But that's the biggest challenge in moving into that space, but also evolving the product and providing products like Ed was talking about.
Fantastic, great. I think that's all that we have time for. Thank you very much to all my fantastic panelists. I think we could continue discussing this for hours. It shows lots of momentum in the market, but many, many moving parts to be sorted out. Thank you to the audience for your fantastic questions, and I look forward to resuming this discussion with all of you over the next couple of months. And with that, we'll pass back to Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, and thanks again to our panelists, Ed, Patrick, Vicky, and Bart. And as Daniel said, it's a fascinating conversation. You know, could have let them go on all afternoon or all morning. You know, this feels like there's a lot to unpack in this space, but obviously we must move swiftly on to the next point on our agenda. Moving on, we'll now address the challenges and opportunities for measuring connected TV. I know there were some questions to the panel around measurement, so I feel it's a great time to really jump into this conversation. I know we were lots of wrestling with this issue. There's lots of myths and challenges relating to connected TV measurement, so should be a great panel coming up. And once again, don't forget, there'll be questions for the panelists. You can submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your window, and we can direct them to you there. So please welcome our moderator for the next session, Anita Karas. She's the research director for Yahoo, and Anita was recently awarded the IAB Europe's Researcher of the Year as part of the European Research Awards for 2021. So the panel is definitely in safe hands. So I believe Anita is through. So over to you, Anita.
Thank you, and hi everyone. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves in a sec, but I firstly wanted to extend a warm welcome to all of you today. As mentioned, my name's Anita Karas. I am Yahoo's Data Solutions Director across EMEA, and I really can't wait to discuss with our illustrious panel of experts all the challenges and opportunities that CTV faces when it comes to measurement. We already heard in the last panel discussions around measurement versus metrics, be that impressions or GRPs, as well as starting to talk around what those needs are for cross-stream measurement, whether that's collaboration, further transparency. So I think we've got a lot to discuss. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Christian to kick off the introductions. Hi there, Christian.
I think Kistan is struggling to be found in the Zoom green room we have set up here today. So it might be worth going to one of the other panelists to interest them as we find her.
Typical, look at that.
That's, right.
Yeah, that's fine. Paul, can I hand over to you, please?
Certainly. Paul Good from Comscore, been working on digital measurement for many years. In the last 5 years, looking at cross-media measurement. Well, initially outside the US, but including the US at the moment.
Great, thank you. And Alexandra?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Alexandre Dergacourt, Technical Director at Iberos. So I'm in charge of identifying key technical challenge facing the advertising ecosystem, providing direction as to where focus should be applied and what is this focus should be covering. Also co-leadership of a role within IAB task forces like research, user privacy, etc., etc. And finally, yes, I work with the countries, regulators, tech companies, etc.
Perfect. Well, I think while we wait for Christian to join, I think we should sort of kick off and at least sort of start here. So as an opening question, I would like to ask you, both of you, if I may, what do you see as the #1 challenge for CTV measurement today? Can we start with Paul, please?
Certainly. I'm going to start immediately by questioning your question and getting into some definitions. I think it's probably, when you say the biggest challenge for measurement, it's probably worth splitting measurement down into, you've got the validation of, was an ad delivered as promised, and was there any fraud, and the sort of the mechanical operational side of it. And then we've got the challenge of audience measurement. Can we actually determine the people who are exposed and reach and frequency? And then you get on crucially onto outcomes and effectiveness and the kind of impact. So I'm really hoping that Christiana is going to make it, because I'm relying on her to talk about the final bit. So my space is very much looking at the audience validation. How do we get down to a person as opposed to just a device or a household? We have a whole host of challenges, but I'm going to say, I'll start with political. It is a willingness to address this and fund this, and how this gets integrated in a valid way into TV currencies.
Perfect. What about Alex? I think perhaps more talking around some of those delivery measures and the verification.
Yeah. So first, for me, the #1 challenge is, for me, definitely ad fraud. In fact, for me, that. Why I'm saying that, because first we need to have in mind the volume of video impression increase in CTV. So it was on a good trend before that, but an unexpected factor and a biggest impact was clearly the pandemic, due to the family at home, etc., etc. And that gave new opportunities for buyers to engage brand with content, but deeper relationship with consumers. But CTV advertisers suffer from the same ad fraud issues encountered across all video advertising for both direct and product programmatic campaigns. So in the recent past, CTV spoofing schemes like parameterized bucket, stream scam, shadowed by ad verification companies like Oracle, Mode, Human, and Double Verified. And most of this fraud use server-side ad insertion to generate fake CTV inventory, etc. But there are solutions, in fact. Okay, we're talking about worst scenario, but there are solutions. For example, like ad stakes to allow publisher to clarify, indicate who their seller are, supply chain objects also, together with seller.json, provide transparency on the various entities. And the last one, which is ad cert 2.0, a framework and guidelines for safe and transparent transaction across ad buying. So yes, for me, it's ad fraud definitely. But okay, talk about delivery, but that's for me the first point, I'd say.
Great. And Christiane, welcome. You've actually joined right at the right time. I'll let you introduce yourself as a sort of simple question, but we were just also then discussing what we saw as the #1 challenge in CTV measurement today. So if you can kind of incorporate both of those into your response, that'd be great, Christiane.
Yeah,
welcome.
no worries. Sorry about that. I seem to get lost in the masses of the group, but yeah, so thanks, Anita. So Christiane Roberts, I work at Kantar in our product development team. So really have that global view as well in terms of, I guess, where the technologies stand in terms of measurement. And I think for CTV, really the biggest challenge from a measurement perspective that we know kind of exists with Kantar is really the fragmentation of the market and the number of different, I guess, publishers and players that are out there that really does make it hard to kind of combine that and get to a consistent view. And I know it was touched on in the previous panel as well in terms of getting that parity. And I think it's very similar to what we see in digital. And I think that's definitely sort of what we're seeing is the industry going the same way with CTV as well.
Perfect. So as Paul really started to articulate, we're really kind of covering 3 real streams here. One is really around that delivery, looking at verification measurements, and then also then right the way through to campaign impact. So a lot of this stuff to kind of unravel over the months and years ahead. So let's sort of move on slightly. How would you see CTV measurement in terms of advancement? So over the last 12 months, have there been any particular areas of focus or advancements, whether that be in one market or whether that's sort of more on a broader global basis? Alexandra, would you like to lead on that in terms of advancements that you've witnessed over the last 12 months or so?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so first we need to know, I mean, for the people, CTV can be measured, in fact, the way linear TV is measured. So not measured in the same way as mobile or PC. It's definitely a new territory. First, there's a lack of common identifier across different platforms, okay? That's the fact. So the ecosystem needs to keep pushing on it because it will help to better calculate the value of impression. It will need to be also privacy-centric, but today there is the first party data collected from the audience. Also, there are probabilistic data collection approach, deterministic data collection, etc. So also, it's more and more recommended to use app stored IDs, which is a unique app identifier, in fact. It's crucial for Iberos for targeting, block listing, brand safety, and fraud prevention, and also measurement. It's also recommended to use the user agents. It allows for prices, targeting, better creative, ad delivery, analytics, and measurement. Second of all, there are multiple measurement methods, but not only. First, lack of access to many device platform operating system, which means that third-party verification vendor cannot run client-side in many cases, you know. And the second thing is the increased use of SSI, server-side ad insertion in CTV, ad delivery, which results in new complication around IVT, invalid traffic detection. So that's why in the last months, there are different work with, for example, with the tech lab, to support SSI, okay, with the new macros server side. Also provide guidance around HTTP headers that can help with SSI support again, and also the deprecation of VPED, okay, which cannot run on CTV platform, and replace it with open measurement. So the standardization of CTV advertising measurement is still in early stages. That's the fact, but ongoing to help the industry.
Great, thanks, Alexandra. Paul, what about you? Have you seen any sort of advancements over the last 12 months or so?
Certainly, I think one of the most encouraging ones is seeing the traditional TV JICs measurement organizations starting to sort of accept and acknowledge the need to expand the scope of their measurement to include what I would call TV data feeds. So because it's not just stuff coming from smart TVs, but set-top boxes, and census level connection. But then this raises the question of how do you know, these data sources all come with their own particular foibles, and a technical committee of a TV JIC is going to want to know that, you know, what exactly is being ingested. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on the how one validates, normalizes, and integrates those data sets. And we are doing work with one of the European JICs at the moment precisely on this, in laying out the framework as from Comscore's US business, where we process 40 million households of set-top box data each day from 6 different cable companies that are providing data into us. We've had a lot of experience of, let's say, the joys of the different data sets, the different issues on the collection side that we can see. And likewise then on the CTV side, we have a different set of challenges where, again, when you see these reports coming out of a particular silo and a selection of CTV data, we have to understand actually what is that data set, what is it representing? Is it the entirety of those devices? Is it a subset panel? What are the edit rules that are being applied? And this is really where, you know, it's the dull, pedantic work of technical measurement and being able to transparently present this to a technical committee so that people understand what this data is. We also need to look at how we deduplicate, because we're going to get data from set-top boxes and also from CTV data in the same household, and we obviously don't want to do any double counting as we're bringing those data sets together. So in summary, I'd say it's encouraging to see the interest from the TV JICs on the onboarding. Bigger questions about where we're going to do with the data, but at least there is the appetite to try and onboard it.
So we're definitely, I think both responses so far is very much a work in progress. Christiane, have you got anything to add there?
No, I think Paul's done probably a very good job of explaining the challenges that we have as a research industry in terms of pulling together all of those data sources. And I think, you know, I think probably in the last 12 months, we haven't seen a huge amount of change in terms of, I guess, the accessibility of the measurement and the cost of that measurement coming down. I think we are very much in kind of the phase of trying to understand how we get that comparability between channels, and the research is quite expensive, I think, to get, particularly when you talk about the passive measurement of the CTV channels. I think generally what I would say is so mostly in the research industry, we see there's a lot of kind of passive panel measurement, generally at smaller scales on a market level, where we've looked at measuring CTV, and probably the reach historically hasn't been high enough within individual campaigns to be able to give a huge amount of value and depth of the insights. And I think as we see the CTV, proportion of media spend going up, then that helps us to be able to measure it. I think there are progresses, there's a lot of stuff, there's I guess that want in the industry for partners to come together, and we are seeing that a little bit more, with the WFA, with Origin. So, Kantar has just been appointed as the preferred supplier to be able to build that panel out with the aim of starting sort of beta tests in 2023. So things are happening, I think, in the background, but for advertisers today to be able to access that, I think, it's going to take a bit more time to make that that kind of research and the methodologies accessible.
I'm going to actually sort of jump pace a bit, as we've got Simon Thomas. Thank you for your questions coming in on the live as we speak. Let's sort of move a little bit forward around some of these measurement solutions. So one of the questions is, what is the best or sort of stroke most affordable solution to deduplicate accurately across these silos? We talked about the fact that this data is in very many facets. But how do we really deduplicate that to really kind of talk to a person or a device in that measurement strategies? I don't know whether Christiane or Paul wants to jump in there.
I'll happily take a swing at that one. Yeah, so I think one of the, from Simon's earlier question around I think we need to agree on scope, which is we're not just looking at extended TV. The ambition of TV JICs just to add in their digital inventory onto linear is not satisfactory from an advertiser and an agency point of view. And we need to have the ambition to do, if not total video, including all forms of video, total view, where we're actually bringing in display in as well. And that's the work that's come out of the World Federation of Advertisers, as Christian was mentioning before, to define at least a consistent methodology for bringing all the digital components together, while leaving openness for TV JICs to contribute their TV data in a way that suits them. And I think we'd see that the WFA methodology is very applicable for dealing with individual devices and getting a relationship between a device and a person. There's still a challenge on the TV side where we're needing to personify household data, set data, and I think there's a different set of methodologies around there. So we're fully, and ultimately what the WFA is proposing is something called a virtual ID, or a virtual people ID, which is a universe that is equal in size to the population of the country and representative of that. And the question of then the mechanism of how do you apply both digital events onto that vid space and all the TV data. For the TV data to work at scale, we absolutely believe you've got to bring TV data feeds in, so set-top box data and CTV data. The US Advertiser Association, the ANA, is partnering with Comscore to run a proof of concept. So similar in the way that Project Origin for ISBA is doing in the UK, Comscore's running on behalf of the ANA. And the first test, the first phase that we're running pre-Christmas is taking that personified set-top box data, applying it into this bid framework, and then taking data from a number of publishers and running some ad campaigns over that. Next year, in the first half, we'll be expanding that to adding CTV data into those TV data feeds and expanding to include some of the digital platforms, the large-scale players, the walled gardens, into that, so we can bring all the data into a consistent data set.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing I would probably add to that is it probably depends on which part of research we're talking about. You know, are you talking about audience delivery, or are you talking about the impact of that content once it's been, you know, once consumers have been exposed to that? And I think that's where the different layers get trickier as well. I think the audience and delivery is the first level. You know, as Paul said, it's getting those data sources into one consistent playing field and understanding that a lot of those will be at the household level, and, you know, getting down to that kind of consumer level within those households. And once you layer on sort of getting the attitudinal results from that, and you have to conduct surveys, then that panel, you start to go from sort of what is a huge kind of geographic scope to a smaller subset of panel you've managed to match, and then a smaller set again that are willing to kind of conduct those surveys. And then obviously you have the exposure of your campaign within that, which is even smaller. So that's where I think when it comes to the attitudinal and the brand impact, it does become harder. And that's where often we then start to pull back and look at the other methodologies that we have that use more modeled approaches that allow you to get to understanding impact from probably a smaller subset of that panel. So I guess that's the only thing I would add as well. It is the available research will largely depend on I guess what your objectives and what hypothesis you're trying to test.
Great, thank you. I think that sort of very well answers that question. So thank you, Simon, for that. Moving on a bit, and we've kind of touched on this in terms of some of the initiatives that are already starting, but how do you believe the industry can come together to really help in driving forward with CTV measurement? Maybe starting with Alexandra there. Alexander?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so for the industry, yes, so today I don't want to say issue, but the idea is really to have a standardization. You know, right now there are solutions today. There are a lot of working groups, etc. But there is a lack of a standard in order to identify the value of impression. This is really something in place. We need in CTV and also OTT, etc. So you have the first party data, you have the probabilistic information, app store ID, etc. So yeah, so I mean, yes, today we are without talking about the removing of a third-party data, etc., etc. Of course, in CTV, we're not talking about cookie, but identifier. Yes, so yes, so I think I don't know what to say more about that.
Okay.
Except really there's this need of standardization, I'd say, because there are a lot of company, lot of publisher who would like to provide more information about the data to the buyers. Buyers who would like to or are interested in the virtual CTV across, etc. I mean, this is a larger question, I'd say.
Are we actually seeing any industries coming is the industry coming together in any countries? Like there is, I know in Italy there's this call from the UPA about unity. Do we see any countries leading the charge in tackling this at a more industry level? Have we had any observations?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the I think the Dutch and the Swiss have been working collaboratively for some time. I would say that Project Origin in the UK is an indication of the still fragmented nature of digital measurement in the UK market. And I think how this is going to come together inevitably has to get driven by the advertisers and their agencies, because you can't blame any one medium for having silos of measurement. Media owners tend to fund 80, if not 100% of the measurement of their media, and it is not in their interest to incur additional extra costs to do cross-media measurement when they're not necessarily certain whether they're going to benefit or not. And while advertisers may say, oh, well, we ultimately pay for everything because it's our money, it's like, yeah, but other people are actually funding it. And I think this is where the funding and the governance needs to change, and that if the scope is to be total video measurement or total view, then the country needs to come together at that level. And you mentioned Italy. Interesting, the government regulator has intervened to prevent further fragmentation that was happening in the Italian market, to say, this isn't acceptable, and we want to see the Advertiser Association driving the agenda, and please respond. So we'll see whether the funding comes from that, but there are some technical challenges, and Simon made a question about unified identifiers and leading to outcome measurements. There are still some challenges on how that is being done, and at the moment I'd say most of the work is around just addressing the planning and the measurement on that trading side as opposed to outcomes. But this is this is more of a political and commercial challenge at the moment.
I think it's key about the funding source to any of these things. What you brought up, Paul, was a really valid point around, with every measurement, no matter where, we're talking CTV now, but any media, as you say, has inherently been funded by the media owners of that particular media, and hence being in the siloed route to measure in as thorough basis as possible, but for the thing that they are playing in that space for. You have to be in the game to feel that you should be contributing and funding. So I don't know what that solution is, and we can see, it'd be interesting to see, to your point, where this has kind of had government intervention in Italy, where that starts to lead from a funding perspective to make that change, perhaps structurally, to enable far more cross-media measurement.
Well, for me to give voice to Simon Thomas, who is our fifth panelist on this.
I think he is. I think we should actually promote him.
As his point in the is the idea of a levy. And my understanding is this was the South Africans actually introduced this quite a long time ago to help fund some of their media measurement. And I think that that would be very helpful, that whatever ad spend comes out of an advertiser and their agencies, that a fixed proportion has to go on the measurement of that media, and therefore where the media ends up, that money has to get allocated towards whatever the communal decision of the governing bodies of those media, so that we can get the proper level of measurement.
I mean, I think we see similarities with like what's happening in CTV is what's happening in digital. And I guess to your points, Paul, Anita, like there's a lot of obviously research measurement gets paid through the publishers and the media agencies to prove and validate that to the advertisers. But from a Kantar perspective, we see that a lot of advertisers do push us and they want that measurement and they would be willing to pay for it if they could get the parity, and they want that kind of cross publisher. And I think there is a lot of demand from that from the advertiser side, but because of the way that money has flowed in the past, that's sort of the structure. And there's good reason why publishers, do their own independent studies and want to show the value of that. And maybe there's also, I guess, some inherent risk. And if you move to a cross publisher study, what does that mean? Like, if you don't necessarily have control over that comparability, you're kind of losing some of that control that could be seen as a risk to your revenues in the future. And so I can understand why a lot of these publishers, and a lot of the, the players in the market are in some ways reluctant to join that. And with Kantar, we've been going through a huge process on the digital side with kind of our Project Moonshot initiatives to try and deliver that to advertisers. And it does take a lot. It takes a lot to kind of get that trust and security to the providers in the market, for them to understand that it's, we're trying to help everyone win in this market. And give that research back to the advertisers that they really want to be able to optimize their brand and, work with you guys in a more, in a better way. So I think to Paul's point, it's very political. And I think, there's some markets that obviously will take some legislation. But I think the additional challenge we probably have with CTV that we see is, digital, there are some publishers and players in the game that are cross markets. And I think in CTV, we probably see a bit more differences on a market by market basis on some of those providers as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think we just go over to Theo's question now, just to sort of change tack a little bit, who says, given all the fragmentation challenges and the multiple options from providers, do you have any concrete recommendations on how to get the most out of starting CTV effectively? So I don't know if anyone wanted to, and this is from an advertiser's perspective, if anyone wanted to tackle that. So this is kind of, how do you really get the most of starting in the CTV space as an advertiser today? Have we got any recommendations?
I mean, I'm a bit happy to take a stab and start, and if anyone else wants to jump in. I think from an advertiser's perspective, I guess, like when anything's new to your media plans, if you're not used to it, we would always advise that you have some budget for innovation to trial these things, because there is some information out there. And in terms of we have a lot of data from the Kantar perspective in terms of TV effectiveness and the best way to design your content to have the greatest impact. I think some of it is going to be, there is an element of, you want to put some budget in innovation, and it's a bit of trial and error, and work with your media agencies who really have the expertise in that area in terms of media planning to try and get their recommendations and understand the best use. But I think the one thing that we always advise to our advertisers is go in with a very clear objective of what. So for every media channel, you should have a very clear objective, and CTV is no different to that. So if your objective of that channel is to hit a specific audience because you have better targeting capabilities, then make sure that that's very clear with your media agencies when you look at what media to book. So I think those would be sort of my recommendations is, it's trial and error, but do lean on the agencies that you're working with the expertise that they have, and make sure that you're very clear on what your objectives are with that advertising.
Perfect. I think those clarity of goals, test and learn, going back to the basics, and obviously leaning on any support networks from the agency is key. Any other comments before we move on?
No,
we're good. Oh, Alexandra?
Yeah, I wanted to add for that. Yeah, definitely. If an advertiser buyer wants to start with the CTV, now there's several ways. For example, discussing with some publishers, because for example, of course, the advertiser has budget, as said previously. Also, they have a budget. Also, they have some goals to achieve, etc. So maybe discussing with some publisher how to achieve that, it's a good way. Also, discussing with, for example, in programmatic, with some DSP, because each a DSP. Now more and more DSP are technically connected to CTV, to SSP, CTV, publishers, etc. So maybe discussing with some DSP and making some tests, making some tests with a little budget, maybe doing some A/B testing. I don't like this kind of stuff, but maybe doing some A/B testing with some DSP will help them to understand, to test, and maybe increase their budget if they are satisfied or not. So yeah, discussing with publisher, discussing with DSP, yeah, several ways to do that, to start.
Great, thank you, Alexandra. And that actually brings us to a close on this panel session. Fantastic interaction from both our panelists and the audience today. So I really appreciate all of the questions that came in at real time that really got everyone's brains ticking to respond as on the fly. So hopefully we got to all of those. And I just wanted to thank everyone for their expertise today. It's been a great session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita. Research award winner and panel host extraordinaire. Thank you very much for that. Very much appreciated. Another great discussion there, and how you can see the measurement opportunity for connected TV is continually evolving, and always worth keeping up to speed with. So for our next panel, moving swiftly on, we're going to look at brand safety and suitability for connected TV. So the other side of the coin, really, in terms of, you've got your measurement on your one hand, then you need to make sure your brand safety is taken care of as well. So earlier this year, the IB Europe released a guide to help all stakeholders working in the connected TV ecosystem maintain best practices and ensure brand safe environments for advertisers. We'll drop a link to the report in the chat box so you can download it, but it's a really good piece of work. It just covers everything you need to know on connected TV, including a bit of what we're going to talk about now, which is that brand safety and suitability piece. Obviously, today, the modern marketer is equipped with a variety of solutions for brand safety and content verification when dealing with tried and tested digital advertising formats. However, with connected TV being a new channel, it brings completely new challenges. As advertisers continue to shift budgets into a new medium, trust will be key to unlocking the full potential of this channel. So how do we do that? Well, I'm delighted to welcome the next moderator for this panel, Justin Alder-Swanberg, who's the Director of Marketplace Quality at MediaMath, who will ask the panel exactly that. And I can see Justin has made his way out of the green room, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. And of course, brand safety and brand suitability are very important topics, very hot topics. Let me just introduce quickly our speakers. We have John Ross, Director of Product Strategy at DoubleVerify. We have Carla Lawrence, Head of Operations at Finecast. And we have Janelle de Rivera, Director of Product Management, Moat Analytics, Oracle Advertising. So let's just get right down to it, shall we? So folks, as the adoption of CTV continues to grow rapidly, trust is key to unlocking the full potential of this channel. So how does brand safety and brand suitability work in the CTV environment? Carla, would you mind starting us off? I think you're on mute, Carla.
Rookie error, sorry. So yeah, at Finecast, we buy everything directly from our broadcaster and our premium supply partners. We don't access anything at all from the open exchange. So everything we buy is through direct tag integrations with our broadcasters into their ad servers. We thoroughly vet all of the content we run across. We have humans that go in and continually check where all of our activity is running, and we have agreements in place in terms of what content we are happy to run across. And all of our advertising or all of our ad deals is they're set up in kind of, I guess, categorized into, what is okay for certain advertisers versus others. So I guess if you've got restricted or there's restricted ads, which are graded via Clearcast, that will all be taken into consideration as to which publisher inventory we're running the ads across. So yeah, that's how brand safety and suitability works for us right now at Finecast.
Great, thank you. Really appreciate that. John, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, what Carla mentioned, that's kind of been the best practice that we've seen our buyers use of kind of going forward with these direct campaigns. Because I think a lot of buyers and sellers, they don't realize that there is brands like unsafe content in the CTV space. Like a lot of people don't realize Pornhub has a full suite of connected TV apps, and anyone can create an app, like extremist websites you might see in desktop and mobile, see the same sort of content in CTV. So what we kind of see unfolding here is that just like any other digital platform, buyers, they have to use a third-party vendor, such as a DV remote. And they'll use things like, as in the other platforms, like categories to monitor and target towards, as well as like inclusion and exclusion lists. But even with like the direct buys, we still find it's critical for our buyers to use this kind of technology, as we do find holes where maybe a video player gets shared externally outside of a publisher's walls, or just some sort of weird targeting happens, and this kind of unsafe content filters into what should be a direct, safe campaign.
Right. Very, very interesting. Janelle, could you add to that?
Yeah, so definitely building on Carla and John, I think just taking a step back, and brands want to know that their media investment is protected in CTV in the same manner as other digital media channels. And in order to build that trust and confidence within CTV, brands really need access to the same reporting they have in other environments. And so one of the things with CTV that makes it very unique is that there's also the challenge of even just getting visibility into where your connected TV impressions ran. So even just being able to see and measure where your impressions are running and looking at your inventory across the top devices is an important aspect of thinking about brand safety within CTV. We support brand safety on CTV apps just as we do on open web and mobile apps. With app level brand safety, brands can then gain access to classifications of CTV apps, and they can use that information to determine if there are certain CTV inventory that doesn't align to their brand safety requirements.
That's great. So, I think people wonder if how the tools might differ specifically for CTV, since it's a different inventory type with different characteristics. So can you tell me, Janelle, do the tools that are used to ensure brand safety differ in CTV from other traditional digital channels?
Yeah, so the process is a bit more challenging in CTV from other digital channels. We still have a lack of transparency and standard technologies in CTV measurement. In other digital channels, Fast4 and Open Measurement enable brand safety checks by providing a standard mechanism to pass page URLs, categories, and other metadata about the content of an impression. And these basic metadata is necessary for brand safety vendors to analyze content and help buyers make brand safety and suitability decisions. So generally speaking, TV has not been held to the same standard as digital, and the same goes for newer formats like CTV. So there's definitely more work to be done as an industry to get us where we need to go. We need more sophistication within the ecosystem. And in CTV, not everyone is following the same conventions in identifying apps. There's a lot of point solutions that partnerships are making to be able to accommodate for the lack of transparency and consistency. So really, I think demanding for the same level of transparency in CTV as other digital channels will help push the industry to defining standards that are accepted and adopted.
Thanks. Carla, could you enlarge on that a little bit?
Yeah, I would just agree with everything that Janelle just said. When it comes to technology, we're far behind with regards to CTV. There's a lack of standards that we have got on digital. But I would say in terms of what's the same across CTV versus other platforms, we still need to be prioritizing doing the human vetting and the testing and checking exactly where we've agreed that our ad campaigns are going to run. We should still be using inclusion and exclusion lists across CTV like we do any other any other media. And I think we'll still, even when technology, it does get there, and you know, we've got adoption of app-ads.txt with publishers widely rolled out. And say we've got pre-bid monitoring. That doesn't mean that the walled gardens that we access inventory from will accept these solutions. So I feel like that's going to be an ongoing challenge.
Right. So both of you, what do you think are some of the key considerations to ensuring brand safe environments? Carla, what do you think?
So from my perspective, I would say making sure that you always understand exactly where your ad is being served, know as much as you possibly can. So ensure that you know the device that you're running across, the location of your device, the content or programming information. Not all publishers pass this, but we're starting to see this be shared more and more with our advanced TV partners that we work with at Finecast. And always make sure you're following the Clearcast guidelines for your creatives when you're deciding on which media you're running your campaigns across.
Right, Janelle, do you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, just to emphasize what Carla mentioned, I would say know your partners, work with partners you know and trust. And also work with an independent third-party verification partner to really be able to measure your media performance. I think another important consideration to ensure a brand safe environment is staying on top of measuring and identifying invalid traffic and ad fraud within CTV. And within this past year, we've seen an increase in fraudulent activity in CTV. So it's definitely top of mind, and fraudsters are becoming more sophisticated in how they are targeting. So really devoting substantial effort into being able to track and detect IVT is an important aspect for third-party verification partners.
Great, thanks. John, turning to you now for a moment. I'm sure at Double Verify, you guys have a lot of ideas about best practices for CTV. Can you share some of those best practices?
Yeah, definitely. So there's, I guess, a way of looking at this from the buyer's lens, and another way of looking at it from the seller's, the publisher's lens. On the buyer's end, using a verification company, you should hopefully have access to a lot of tools, and a lot of those should hopefully also mirror what is already in place for desktop and mobile. So just as a buyer would say, they would open up DV, they would say, okay, they don't want to serve into, maybe it's like adult content. They don't want to serve into like extremist news content. And they can set these kind of categories up. And in our case, those float between screens. So it doesn't matter if it serves into desktop or CTV, it both works. So the best practice is turn those on, make sure you've got them on across the different screens. And if you have something like the inclusion exclusion list saying you don't want this one particular app, or you do want this one particular app, make sure the same thing is turned on for the screens as well. The other side of it is kind of on the publisher side. Publishers, they offer, generally speaking, the same sort of like inclusion and exclusion list, but not as much on the app level, but on the show level. And so this has been a common practice for a long time in digital and linear, where you can say, you don't want to serve into some shows that might not be suitable for your brand. So this is still a popular tool utilized by the publishers, and is more of a direct conversation between buyer and seller. The publishers are also, over time, they're gearing up to use and more monetize their first party data. So just as they have all these show lists, they are gearing up now to categorize those and create kind of like suitability categories, contextual categories themselves. So I'm sure over the next year or so, we'll start to see that becoming more and more popular out there.
It makes sense. Makes sense. Janelle, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. So another kind of best practice I also wanted to call out is also just thinking about the customer experience as you're thinking about what what is brand suitable for you? Is the experience positive for your customer? Are they engaged with your ads? Are your ads showing over and over again? I'm thinking about that frequency capping, and also, are they actually in the room when the ad is playing? So these are the types of questions I think that should always be top of mind, but especially in newer channels like CTV.
Great. Yeah, that makes total sense. So Carla, let me ask you a question. In order to drive the CTV opportunity across Europe, it is imperative that brands can access the same reporting and insights that they have access to in other environments, which of course, I think folks wonder if that's going to be more of a challenge in CTV. So what type of insights can brands expect to see from a brand safety perspective in the CTV environment?
Sure. So I think just to draw on what Janelle said earlier, brands want consistent insights across all channels, and the ability, I think, to benchmark across different channels. I think really Finecast have probably been quite successful because they've been doing this for some time. So we work directly, as I mentioned, with the broadcasters, UK broadcasters, and some CTV partners across all advanced TV. And we've been doing this transparently. I suppose Finecast has been around for 4 years, but Group M have been working with the broadcasters to build these solutions probably since around 2010. We've built these solutions alongside them from the ground up and have been able to provide consistent brand reporting across the board as a result of these deep and long withstanding integrations that we've had in place. So we are providing holistic measurements to brands, and have been for some time, or since the day of Finecast being born. So yeah,
that's great. Janelle, could you perhaps add to that?
Yeah, I think we've seen brand safety kind of be highlighted into the spotlight, and a focus on rethinking aggressive blocking tactics that have impeded critical news content, definitely with the pandemic and the elections. So it's something that continues to remain top of mind for advertisers and publishers, and at Moat, we want to continue to evolve along with the industry and the need of our customers. So I think brand safety is just as much about the content you want to appear next to as the content you don't. So thinking about the brand nuance and customization is more critical as we take into account the unique differences and strategies of individual organizations. So being able to really support custom segments and working with the brand to understand what is a suitable profile for their brand is important.
Great. So just, to get a sense of, if you were to make recommendations for folks to make sure that they're doing what they need to do for brand safety and brand suitability in CTV, John, what would you say is one tip for brands that you would suggest?
It's to use a verification partner. No one should basically grade their own homework. It's very hard to understand if you're serving somewhere where you shouldn't without some sort of verification partner. Like I think I mentioned earlier, we do find direct campaigns that are serving where effectively they shouldn't. And without verification, you have no idea if that's happening. So just as folks use this in other screens, they should use us in CTV.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Janelle, what are your thoughts? What one tip would you offer to brands if they were asking you?
Yeah, I would recommend being vocal with your media partners that you need greater transparency in CTV, and supporting CTV standardization initiatives. The IAB has guidelines on how apps should identify themselves, and really pushing your partners that you work with to be following these standards will help adoption in the industry.
Right. And Carla, what about you? Is there a tip that you would suggest as particularly significant to offer?
Sure, yeah. I would suggest that whoever you work with accesses the inventory that you're running across as directly as possible, ideally directly, and make sure that these platforms are all tested out. So you know exactly where your ad is being placed.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, looking ahead into the future, where would each of you consider that you see brand safety and brand suitability in CTV evolving over, say, the next 6 to 12 months? Because I'm sure it's going to be a constantly changing environment, as with the standards becoming adopted by folks. So, Janelle, what are your thoughts over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, I think we'll start to see transparency around the content become more prevalent. There are working groups focused on gaining access to more granular metadata today. So we really do need to get to genre level reporting to allow for more granular measurement. And publishers should make content level information available more widely so that buyers can target contextually relevant ads within their CTV advertising. So collaborating with industry trade bodies will be important to getting to this level of transparency. It's not something that's going to be solved in a vacuum. So really making sure that we are working with the trade bodies to push this forward. And then another advancement expected in the next 6 to 12 months is open measurement for CTV. And OMSDK for CTV is being developed as part of the IAB working group. And this will really get us to industry standards around viewability and verification measurement within CTV. So getting to that same standard of measurement enables us to really be able to compare performance across all video campaigns and all devices in a consistent manner.
Great, thank you. Carla, what about you? How do you see brand safety and brand suitability in CTV evolving over the next 6 to 12 months?
I think we're going to see greater need for verification as we see CTV's growth and the appetite for its scale. I think we're going to see increased demand for measurement and increased expectations in terms of how much we're about to measure, and I suppose further and more granular reporting off the back of this. For example, as I was saying, program name and genre rating should or hope to be more the norm. I'd also like to see more investment in things like responsible journalism off the back of having greater controls. And also, again, I guess just to grow on a little bit more on what Janelle was saying earlier as well, more consideration of diversity and inclusion in terms of where we're buying our media, but also how we're targeting the media and our use of block lists to kind of optimize that so that we're not excluding diverse and inclusive audiences.
Yeah, very, very important. John, what are your thoughts? Where do you think CTV going in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, kind of plus one in Janelle's first comment on the content level transparency. That to me is key. We speak with publishers, and what we hear is they're working as basically as hard as possible, definitely in the States at least, to try to convert their TV campaigns into these CTV digital campaigns as the viewership has moved. And so they're investigating ways to do that. And at the same time, we're hearing from our TV buyer friends that they're having campaigns move into this space at a small degree, and then they're noticing they have no information on where that campaign is serving. So in TV land, they get, here's my show, here's my episode, here's my time slot. And then they compare that to these CTV campaigns, and like, at best, they might know the app. And so it's kind of like this weird world where they're trying to be charged more entering the CTV space with higher CPMs, but they get less transparency. And that's going to have to resolve itself over the next year if publishers want these buyers to move over, basically.
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic. I just wanted to enlarge on that a little bit. Is there, any sense that, you mentioned this sort of, not really a conflict, but sort of like a dilemma, in terms of transparency and content. And, anybody please feel free to jump into this one. But, what is the, sort of the the essence of why that's the case, and how do you see it resolving itself exactly? Is it just people are going to realize that they need to do this in order to monetize, or what's the resolution there?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, like I've always seen buyers push for like show lists and that kind of granularity in digital, but it's been kind of like a one-off thing. It's not been standardized. It's been hard for buyers to use some of these lists that kind of like a publisher would provide in like an Excel sheet one-off type thing. And that was fine when digital video was kind of smaller, but now as it's scaling up, it's hard for an agency to do that at scale, analyze all that data at scale. So I think that's a big piece of it. Also, just digital, there's kind of been a different expectations than the TV buyers. With TV buyers, they expect all this stuff. We've just seen that kind of be a conflict as they move over.
All right, Carla or Janelle, do either of you have any thoughts about that? Just sort of enlarging on the question of, how the content can become more available.
Yeah, I mean, I think CTV is a newer environment, and it's less mature. And right now, it's been a little bit more guarded in the amount of information that's being shared from the publisher side. And so this is definitely a shift that advertisers need to be very vocal about, so that it pushes publishers to make all of this information more transparent and available in a consistent manner.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I don't think that we have any questions from the audience at this time. Is there anybody have any last thoughts that they would like to offer? John, anything?
Use a verification partner.
Very key. Carla?
Everything direct.
Use a verification partner by direct. Janelle, what sort of one thing would you say there at the end?
I would say constantly monitor your CTV campaigns and look at the numbers yourself and see if things are adding up and make sense.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been very enlightening. Gives us a lot of insight into how to tackle this, sort of challenging area of brand safety and brand suitability in a challenging new environment. And thank you very much for joining.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Justin. And thanks to all our panelists there. Another great conversation around connected TV there. Great to see how brand safety for connected TV is being tackled. And some great advice from the panelists there of how best to approach it. So yeah, thank you very much again for that. And as mentioned earlier, if you'd like to see the best practices guide that we produce as part of IB Europe's work, the guide to brand safety and suitability has been dropped into the chat. Right then, so now onto our final session of the day, our headliner, if you will. Please welcome Lucas Rotleb to the stage. He's the Solutions Engineering Lead of OneTrust. In this session, Lucas will share some stats on the immense growth opportunities and challenges for OTT, and will provide a deep dive into solutions that enable publishers and advertisers to capture consent and preferences from within OTT applications and connected TV environments to support compliance with GDPR, CCPA, IAB, TCF 2.0, and many, many more. So I believe Lucas has made it out of the green room and onto the stage. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ryan, for the introduction, and just quickly taking over the screen share, and then we can get it started. So we have talked a lot about like how CTV advertising can work, and also about how you ensure brand safety and brand suitability throughout those processes just in the panel ahead. Now, what I would like to touch base on is what is actually the prerequisite for conducting targeted advertising in the CTV space, and that is collecting valid user consent and preferences. So in today's last session, we will have a look at how can we actually collect consent and preferences in the CTV application to ensure that we can conduct targeted advertising and other well-known concepts that are already used in the web and mobile app atmosphere. Just quickly to introduce myself to the audience, for everyone who I haven't met so far. I'm Lucas. I'm leading the solution engineering team for preference choice at OneTrust, where it's basically all about consent and preference management, and where we help our customers to understand the CTV landscape, to understand the requirements, and to also, obviously provide a software that helps you to collect valid user consents, streamline those consents to the ad tech side. What I would like to talk about today is first a very short look at the technology landscape. We have touched base on this in quite some other sessions throughout today's event already, so I'm going to keep that short. Then I'll move on to some common use cases that we see from a privacy perspective when it comes to collecting consent and preferences in CTV applications. And then we will also have a little time at the end to answer your questions in regards to that. So feel free to use the Q&A box throughout the session. And at the end of the session, I'll be more than happy to answer all of the questions that came up. So let's start with the actual technology landscape and also some consumer expectations that are going along with that. First of all, you're probably all well aware of the different initiatives that especially the walled gardens have started. Google has kind of decided to not deprecate third-party cookies as early as they initially announced, but they will still do it at some point of time, and they will probably also introduce the concept of flock, the federated learning of cohorts at some moment of time. Apple has launched some initiatives recently, with the ITP being quite an old initiative already, that step by step has basically also removed third-party cookies in Safari and also limited the lifetime of first-party cookies. And now, especially in the mobile side, we see the required opt-in for the app tracking transparency prompts. The ATT, which is basically a framework that allows to share the information about the user across different applications on your mobile device. And also Facebook has had some initiatives like the LDU, the limited data usage options, and so on. So there's quite a lot of traction in that market, in that general market. And especially there's a lot of traction when we talk about CTV only, because it becomes a new normal that we have multi-device consumers. So those are statistics now from the US, but it's actually very similar in the European area. The kind of user that only has one device is dying. So there's the majority of users who have more than one device when going online. And that's not just maybe a desktop device and a mobile device like a smartphone or tablet, but it also increasingly becomes to be CTV devices. You can also see that in the statistics of how many people are using video on demand services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and so on. But of course, there's also many other CTV applications that become more and more important. And the big screen is a market that is just growing and growing and growing on the online and on-demand content side. So it's also expected to increase rapidly over the next years. However, there's also some challenges that we see, particularly in the CTV area. So when we look at the mobile market is actually quite easy. We have Apple and we have Android. So we generally have two major operating systems with iOS and the Android operating system, and then a couple of development frameworks used for the app development. However, those are not like dramatically changing the way how you need to implement consent and preference management, because the underlying operating system is always the same. However, in the CTV, or also how it's sometimes referred to be the OTT market, over the top, so depending on what kind of notations and wording we use here, this is much more fragmented. So we see a lot more different devices with different operating systems. We have, of course, also with Google and Apple, the two mobile players in that market. Google offering like Android TV and Fire TV, which is on an Android operating system basis. Apple TV with its with its proprietary operating system here, which is called tvOS. However, this is on an iOS basis as well. Well, it's not limited to Google and Apple. We also see, like, for example, Roku, or also many HTML5 based operating systems, like all of the operating systems of different TV manufacturers that might not use an Android operating system, for example. So we see Samsung as one of the biggest manufacturers there with its operating system Tizen. We see LG with WebOS. And we also see stuff like Xboxes and PlayStations that generally offer a market for us to also conduct targeted advertising. That kind of fragmentation makes it a little harder, though, to implement a content management because the underlying tech stack is totally different, and you have to adopt to those tech stacks for each and every platform that you're using with your application. So that's kind of the challenges that we see. However, there's of course some solutions for those challenges. And I would like to go with you together through some of those kind of concepts that we see that are typically used in CTV landscapes, and to give you an idea of different use cases, how we see our software being used in CTV environments already, and also how that could look like in the future. I've kind of collected some use cases for you that we will go through each other today. And it all starts with the like classical consent use cases. So we're all well aware of the consent banners in web and also in mobile applications. A similar concept, of course, also exists in the CTV space. However, it has its own challenges, like needs to be operable with a remote control, stuff like this. It needs to be readable for the user. The user experience just needs to be a little different compared to when we have a touch screen, for example. But the concepts behind that are quite similar. So we see like classical GDPR-based opt-in consent use cases where you need to actively opt in into all of those technologies that are not deemed to be strictly necessary to provide your service. We, of course, then also see the IAB-TCF coming up in that space as the kind of major framework when it comes to collecting and transferring valid user consent to the ad tech side. We also do see some use cases in other regions of the world, like for example in America, when it comes to the opt-out of sale use case. And we also might have synergy effects if we provide a service around different platforms for web, mobile, and CTV maybe, and we want to make sure that we ensure a consistent approach across all of the apps that we have. And we might even want to offer our customers to synchronize their settings across those different platforms. And there's also other use cases when it comes to executing privacy rights that we will have a look at. But let's get started with probably a very classical use case that everyone's well aware of. So, you know, those cookie banner from the web, for example, where you have the option to opt in into all of those technologies. So go into your settings and amend your choices. And you might have exactly those options on a connected TV as well. That might look a little different. You can see what you can see here is just one of those options of a first layer experience. And then maybe in the second layer, you want to provide additional options to the user. What you can already see is from a user experience perspective, it looks a little different when you compare it to the web or mobile app experience, because the screen size, the screen resolution is different. The kind of distance that you as a user have to the screen is different. So the UI needs to be different to kind of adopt to that specific scenario. However, this still enables the user in the same way to make granular choices based on their preferences, like you're used to do it from the web and mobile app side of the things. That, of course, also works in conjunction with the IAB-TCF framework. So you can also collect valid user consent in terms of the IAB-TCF and streamline that further to the vendor side to make sure that the consent string is passed on, and then all of the information that is relevant for the TCF is disclosed on the first layer, as well as then also on the second layer, where you have the more like granular choices in terms of the different purposes and features that the IAPTCF defines, or maybe even stacks if you're using those. But of course, also like the option to look into the global vendor list, to see all of the different vendors that the publishers working together with, to see the different purposes each vendor is serving, and to also have a look at the legal basis that is used, whether it's consent or legitimate interest or both, for certain purposes. So it's pretty much the same concept that we already know, and offering the same options that you know from web or mobile CMP, but with a UI that is really optimized for the CTV landscape, and that is operable via the remote control. There's also different thoughts to that that we are currently working on, like, for example, providing a QR code for any user who wants to provide their choices like this, scanning that QR code and then being able to just set the preferences on maybe a mobile device that is, from a user experience perspective, a little bit easier to navigate in compared to like a big screen. In the background, it also happens quite similar to what everyone is already used to. So our CMP just collects the user consent and then makes sure that this user consent is passed on automatically to third parties through frameworks like, for example, the IAPTCF, or also via direct integration, depending on what kind of advertisers you're using and how those advertisers are integrated into your application. And of course, you can also use that consent locally in your application if you like. So typically it gets stored in local storage as well, so that you can access it at any point of time and make some tweaks to your application based on the user selection as well. That's like those use cases that we typically see in Europe. Of course, we also have the US as a big market for many European publishers as well. And we mainly see that do not sell my personal information concept residing from the CCPA in California. That is basically just providing the user with an opt-out option, for example, for personalized advertising. And that's of course also supported and can also be geo-targeted to your users who are coming from the US rather than maybe coming from Europe. Important is now that all of what we have seen in terms of the UI is not something you need to develop on your own, but it's really something that a CMP provider is providing you to configure and then simply integrate into your existing CTV applications. So at OneTrust, you can simply configure the UI of this CTV CMP in the same way as you would configure the UI for your web CMP or for your mobile app CMP. So there's no need to develop your own UI. We're doing this by generating a parameterized SDK, a native SDK for all of the different CTV platforms and operating systems, right through the OneTrust platform UI. And then when we look at the kind of communication dependencies here, that SDK is sitting in the middle between our actually backend application and the OTT or CTV environment that you're providing in your CTV application. And it basically helps you to render the UI that was defined in the OneTrust platform on the OTT or CTV device, and offers the choice to the user. And whenever the user makes any changes or confirms the initial consent, we're passing back this information to the SDK, and the SDK helps us to save those preferences into the local storage of the device and also back to the OneTrust platform if needed. That helps, of course, to keep an audit-proof record of consent when we have it back into the OneTrust platform, but it also helps you to gain insights into the consent statistics, which is very important to understand. How are users behaving on that banner? Can you optimize yourself maybe? And do you see different behaviors from different regions in the world, from different countries, or from different platforms maybe? So that lets you analyze all of this consent data. And if you wish, it also lets you store the consent information against an actual user profile or identifier, which can then be enriched with other consent information, or it also helps us to enable cross-device consent scenarios, where basically the consent information that you, for example, provide in a mobile app environment as a signed-in user in the mobile application are seamlessly synchronized to the CTV environment where you're logged in with that same user, and you're rather informed as a user that your settings have been synced than needing to go through all of those settings again and make the same choices that you have already provided. So from a user experience point of view, a very seamless user experience. That is also, yeah, I think creating a better user experience and allowing you to show that you're valuing your users' privacy across all of the devices that they're using. What you can do on top of that is, for example, also provide the option for your users to let them decide which devices should be included in this synchronization. So you can identify and say, well, those are all of the devices where you logged in with your account. Do you want to synchronize the consent information across all of those devices? Or would you like to maybe exclude a specific device? Particularly in CTV, that might make sense because we see that TVs are quite frequently used more as a household device and not as a personal device. Like we see that for smartphones or tablet, for example. So you might want to have different settings on the TV compared to your mobile device. And this option, of course, allows to have different settings if you wish, or it also allows to synchronize the settings across all of those devices if you like. So that's probably the consent side of things, which is relevant to capture in order to be able to conduct targeted advertising and to provide personalized content to your users. Now, when we speak about privacy, it's not just about collecting consent, but also about other important things, like, for example, providing the option to your users to launch a request of information, to launch or to execute their right to access or their right to deletion. And also this is a use case that we see coming up more and more frequently also in the CTV space, that right from your CTV application, you might want to offer your consumers the chance to access the data that you have about them, or even to exercise their right to deletion, to show also that you are valuing their privacy and that you are a trusted partner and are really acting upon their kind of preferences. If you click on request download, this might take you to a next kind of section where maybe the email address is already pre-populated based on your account, or if not, you can already also enter it, and then you hit on confirm. And what that does in the backend is, again, that from a general perspective, it works quite similar to the CMP use case. That means the whole UI and workflow are defined in the OneTrust platform on the right-hand side here in that diagram. The SDK then helps us to render the UI on the device. The request itself is made on the device to either download or delete the data. It's coming back through the SDK, right through the OneTrust platform, where we are keeping track of all of the requests from all of your customers, and where we are assigning the requests into predefined workflows that help you to fulfill the requests in a timely manner. So to make sure to meet the timelines of, for example, in the GDPR 30 days or in the CCPA 45 days. And that also helps you to follow up with that request through our encrypted messaging portal, where you can directly present the information to your customer. They can have a look at the communication you have facilitated with them, and they can also directly download the data here in terms of an access request, or just receive the confirmation in terms of a deletion request. So a totally different use case, but also something that becomes more and more relevant in the CTV space, and something that we have seen coming up also in discussions with our clients and prospects more and more frequently. So I hope that this kind of gave you a good idea of what's possible in the CTV land space, and what different scenarios we see, and how we are also working on enriching the user experience and improving the user experience by facilitating those cross-device consent scenarios. Now, as kind of a last thing, before we move to the Q&A section, I quickly introduce you into OneTrust for everyone who doesn't know us. So really just 1 or 2 minutes. I want to leverage the information here that we are not just a CMP provider, and we are not just dealing with CTV, but we are, of course, being a CTV provider for web, mobile applications and the CTV landscape, but we are actually more than that. So we are really putting trust as the central piece in our strategy of organization, and operationalize privacy, governance, risk, compliance topics, data governance, ethics, environmental and social topics into one single platform. We are very, very quickly growing. We are well funded. We have a very great customer base already, but of course, are always looking into adding new customers each and every month. And you have quite a significant amount of employees already that help to develop all of those solutions that you have seen. A specific number that I would like to point out here is that 40% of our employees are working in product R&D. This helps us to develop the product very, very quickly, to react to market needs, and especially in the CTV landscape, that helps us to provide native SDKs for the fragmented area of CTV, for all of those different operating systems and platforms, in order to kind of lift the burden from you to develop your own consent UI. Rather, you could just configure it in OneTrust and place it into your application, and you have an out-of-the-box consent management solution ready to use. So that takes us to my last slide, and also the next steps and Q&A. So for everyone who is already a customer, we of course encourage you to take part in our communities, have a look at our resources. For everyone who's new to those products, we encourage you to request a demo, test out our software, have a look at the different resources that we provide. We host many different webinars around different topics, so there might be other topics that are interesting for you as well. Or you're of course more than welcome to join different LinkedIn groups and newsletters, or get in touch with me directly as well, if you like, or if you have any questions that we weren't able to answer throughout today's demonstration. So I'll have a look at.
So, thanks, Lucas, for that. I just just questions come in. From Kelly Jacobson Collins, the OneTrust platform looks amazing, but what about the typical user experience where they are accepting consent when they switch their TV on for the first time? How do partners/vendors receive this consent, and is it valid under GDPR?
Yeah, so in terms of the validity under the GDPR, that of course depends on how you capture the consent. So the GDPR has quite some requirements to gather valid user consents, and if you are kind of meeting all of those requirements, the consent is valid. That means you need to be transparent in terms of what you use data for. That means you need to provide some granular options, because consent is always bound to a purpose, and so on. So there's a couple of more requirements, but if you are taking all of those requirements into account, it's definitely a valid consent. In terms of how you pass the consent on to your third parties or vendors that you work with, that of course depends on whether those vendors are part of the IAB-TCF framework. So if they are an IAB-TCF vendor, then it's quite easy, because it all works pretty much the same as we already do that in the web and mobile app environment. So we have the standardized IAB-TCF consent string that we as a CMP are generating, and you can simply query that consent string and find out about the detailed consent for specific partners or vendors. And based on that information, well, you can then decide if you're allowed to place target ads or not. If it's a partner or third party that is not part of the IAB-TCF framework, there's also solutions to do that. So generally speaking, what the CMP does is it captures the user consent and stores the consent in a way that you can easily retrieve this consent information at any point of time. So you can always query our SDK and ask for the latest consent status of the user, and based on that consent status, decide if you're allowed to execute a specific third-party integration, or you need to block it, or you need to limit it. So there's different ways and technologies to pass on that user consent. But of course, we need to do that, because otherwise it doesn't make sense to collect it.
Thank you very much. I'll pause there. If there's any other questions for Lucas, please do drop them into the Q&A box so we can get Lucas to answer them for you live. But if there isn't any more, then thank you very much, Lucas. Really appreciated you taking us through that this afternoon. And thanks again for talking us through the OneTrust platform. Really, really interesting stuff. And it's great to understand user consent and privacy best practices and to get to see inside your platform.
Yeah, happy to join. And thanks everyone for listening in.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Lucas. Right. Well, that brings us to the end of today's virtual connected TV event. And I'm absolutely delighted that you were able to join us today. We've had almost 300 people, I think, dialing in today. I really hope we'll have been able to meet many of you in person before too long. Really looking forward to getting back in the real world and seeing people. I want to thank again our sponsors for today's event, OneTrust Preference Choice and Magnite. We wouldn't be able to put on these events without your valuable support. So thank you very much for that. I'd also like to thank all of our panelists and all our moderators for giving up their time, sharing their knowledge and views on the important topics that were discussed and debated today. I am sure many of our attendees will have taken ideas or more away that will be used to improve your own businesses. I'd also like to thank the team at IAB Europe, Helen Massard, Marie-Claire Perfet, and Lauren Wakefield, and also Georgia Cook, who have worked hard to deliver this event. So thanks very much to those guys. We also have some more great events coming up at the IAB Europe, including a virtual programmatic day. This is the largest virtual event in the programmatic industry, which will take place next Thursday, the 11th of November. The full speaker lineup and announcement soon, so book your seat via the Loom, the link that is dropping into the chat box now. We also have our latest industry speaker with Magnite taking place on the 2nd of November. So if you want to dive even deeper into the world of connected TV and explore Magnite's latest connected TV research with Statista, then please be sure to sign up to that today. Cool, as those links magically drop into the chat box. And finally, I wanted to thank you all for attending and tuning in today. We do really appreciate your time. And the event recordings will be available on the IAB Europe website over the next few days. And as mentioned at the beginning, all of the event speakers today are members of the IAB Europe. So if you are keen to become a member and participate in any of our future and upcoming events, please do get in touch. And there's also opportunities to join the various different committees we have. So please do reach out to Helen, Lauren, and the team. So all that's left for me to say is thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.